All right. Now, U.S. Senate Republicans have just unveiled a new law enforcement reform bill. It's a less aggressive rival to the more sweeping Democratic legislation that's been introduced following weeks of protests against racism and police brutality. And to break down the issue, we have Professor of Criminal Justice at Columbia College, Michael D. Lyman, joining us from Missouri. So, Michael, what does the Republican police reform bill look like? What are some of the practical measures that it outlines to curb police brutality?
Hi, Natasha. Thank you for having me. Well, for starters, probably one of the biggest things on the bill is the establishment of a national database to track problem officers, bad apples, if you will. And that doesn't exist right now. And if that is possible, then that would be a huge step forward in reformation. Among other things like de-escalation training and social worker co-respondence to certain calls.
Now, for policemen who are patrolling the streets across the United States, how will these reforms actually end up trickling down and affect how they do their jobs?
That's a great question. And the problem is that police are controlled locally. They're not controlled nationally. Obviously,
Right.
The federal police are. Most cops are controlled locally. And the extent that they're willing to come on board and go along with it is yet to be seen. However, I think the police now, especially the professional ones, they've got the memo, so to speak, and they understand that,
Right.
that the stakes are high and they need to change according to some of these new reform efforts.
Well, I mean, the memo, it's questionable because we've been seeing these protests and then we see what happened to Rayshard Brooks as an example. It's very shocking. Police officers, they're heavily protected by their unions when it comes to instances of dismissals. And that is an issue that is it being addressed in this new reform? Will their role be changed by this legislation? Do you think that it's fair how many protections officers have in the United States?
Well, there's no question about it. The unions are advocates for the cops, even the bad ones, and
Right.
they come to bat with their collective bargaining and whatnot. But the good news is that the National Fraternal Order of Police just yesterday supported some of these initiatives, and so it looks like they're listening. And it looks like they're willing to buy on to some of it.
Well, what is the feeling among police officers, about this new reform, both the Republican legislation and the Democratic legislation?
You have to remember that police work, the cops are very resistant to change, and that's not a good thing. Society changes, norms change. So I think the professional police officers out there, just like the unions, I think they understand that they need to make some adjustments. But the problem is that the police culture, when you get into police work and you're a new guy, for an example, you have to follow the lead of the more experienced officers. And if those experienced officers are guys that are not playing by the rules, that's problematic. And
Right.
It really calls for supervision in the field by the local departments.